Right, after that delay, we're ready to begin just a few minutes late. First of all, the usual fire evacuation procedures, which I haven't got. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening. Therefore, if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exits are located at the rear and side of this room. Go down the stairs and meet in the War Memorial Park. Next, to note that the open proceedings of this meeting are webcast and are being recorded. Could I ask you please to switch off your mobile phones or to turn them to silent? Right, apologies for absence. I have received apologies from Councillor Mrs. Burgess. That's the only one. Everyone else is here except for Mrs. Bowyer. I don't know where she is. No resignations or replacements. Yes, before I do anything else, can I introduce those of you who don't know Roland Wilson, who I gather has been around the council for quite a long time, but he's just taken on the role of interim licensing manager until we get Linda's proper full-time replacement. So welcome, Roland. Hope you enjoy yourself. Right. First job, proper job of the evening is to appoint a vice chair for this committee. Do I have any nominations? Councillor Putty.
Thanks, Chairman. I propose Councillor Leake to be the Vice Chairman.
And seconded. Thank you. Councillor Robinson. So are we all agreed on Councillor David Leaks as Vice Chair?
If we must.
Okay. I'm assuming then, with all the joviality that he is appointed. Thank you, David. Do come up and join me. Right, next formality, any declarations of conflicts of interest? No street traders here? No? I haven't been told of any urgent items. So the next is to confirm the minutes of the meeting which was held on the 16th of March 2017 and which I recall lasted 6 minutes. Do we confirm that those are accurate minutes? Yes? All agreed? Thank you very much. Member or public participation on any items. Mr. Dinning is visiting, but you're just observing this evening, aren't you? Yes, thank you very much. So we come to the first main part of the agenda, which is fees and charges, and I'll hand over to Tom to introduce. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, committee. So what we have before you is a report which, in terms of the budget strategy for last year, is it just me or this sounds very echoey, doesn't it? Budget strategy for this coming year, the council's policy was to have a 3% increase in fees and charges. That was comprised of a 1.5% inflationary rise and a further 1.5% target, if you like, to make up for budget shortfalls. When this came to committee back in March, we basically agreed to roll forward the existing fees and charges, which had been agreed last year after the very detailed review of fees and charges across most areas of licensing. We did not at that time include any kind of inflationary increase in fees and charges. So what we are proposing in this report is that we do introduce that increased charge of 1.5%, so we're just reflecting on the inflationary increases in our costs, which are primarily staffing related. And as is set out in the appendix, it shows you the current fee levels for the different types of licensing applications against the proposed fees, which generally are, well, I'll give the figures in here, don't I? They fluctuate between no increase up to 2.14%. The fluctuation depends on whether you're rounding up and down figures just to make them easier to administer. But the average increase across all of those licenses is 1.34%. This is basically, again, just to reflect on the fact that our costs have increased this year in line with inflationary increases, and that we are proposing to increase the fees for that purpose. The fundamental nature of fees and charges reviews are that probably every 3 years, we would look to do another detailed review of our fees and charges. And that's, obviously we did one last year, and that was debated by members, and came to fruition and completion in November. Again, we will reflect on any kind of significant changes to licensing as and when they occur. But at this point, we don't deem there to have been any kind of significant change to our processes and practices. We've got things like the Immigration Act, which is requiring us to carry out quite detailed checks of applicants, which is quite a significant change. We've also got some changes coming in the pipeline in terms of how we administer our driver awareness testing. So we will reflect on all of those things in due course to revisit our fees and charges. But at this point, I'd say all that's being proposed is an inflationary increase across all licensing types. Pass back to you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions to ask? Yes, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one, really. There's no comparison. So, especially when we talk about taxi charge and things like that, it'd be good to have a comparison with other boroughs, what they're charging, especially if they're running the same system as what we're running and things like that. We've got, how can we object? We don't know, if you see what I mean, or are we that cheap? I don't know. I'd like to know that, see that whether we're efficient enough or too efficient.
In terms of how we approached setting the fees and charges, I'd have to go back to the November report where we set out the methodology that was used. Now, the methodology that's used by each authority varies, and so does, in terms of the back office charges and the staffing costs, the type of IT systems that we all use, etc., etc. So it is a very specific issue in terms of how we calculate the fees at Basingstoke and Dean Borough Council. We can't reflect on necessarily what those fees are at different authorities. It's not saying it's irrelevant, but we have to have confidence that when we set our licensing fees, we've done that in a way that's considered the actual costs to us as an authority in processing those applications. So I share what you're saying about benchmarking, but in terms of just how we go about setting our fees, it's just done in a way that ensures that we recoup those costs that we've incurred.
I can understand where you're coming from, but it'd be good for us as councillors to make sure we're on the right track, because money's tight everywhere, as we know. And if the end product is that if we charge the taxi drivers too much, at the end of the day the fares go up and people stop using them, or they don't use them enough. And it's just if we could get a broad comparison, it may be a better thing. I don't know, but I'd like to see something somewhere at some meeting to say, well, we're doing this, they're doing that, the difference is, and then we can make our own judgments at this committee whether we're on the right track, because if we're on the wrong track we won't know, and vice versa.
I mean, if I could just comment, I think as far as the actual fees and charges we're charging now, I think I would honestly say we're on as far on the right track as we can possibly get. It's been quite rigorous. But I mean, I agree, it'd be quite interesting to know how it compares to other places. Occasionally that would be quite interesting. But I think as far as whether or not we're getting it right is concerned, I'm not sure we can do much more than we're doing already in actually trying to get it as accurate as we can. But I agree, it would be interesting to know how it compares. Councillor Hussey.
I recall last year when we looked at the new fees and charges that some of them seem to have gone down and some of them had gone up. And there was lots of questions asked at committee, and I, along with one or two other councillors, were part of a working party to look at the methodology, not the actual rates, but the methodology, which was based on our sort of man effort on average cases and overheads. And the conclusion that little working group came to was that it was a very objective process, and it was very robust and thorough and would stand up to scrutiny. And its objective was that we should be seen to be recovering our costs and not making a profit. So comparing with other councils and what they charge, if there was a huge difference, we would have to look at not our methodology, but the way in which we process a particular type of license to see where we were being inefficient or efficient or whatever. So it's not a matter of just changing the... I was very happy with the methodology last year, and you fed the meat in and out came the sausage, out came the fees. And as long as we stick to that, then I'm happy with it. Very time consuming to calculate all those unit costs. So I agree we shouldn't be doing that every year, but maybe every 3 years doing a review. And therefore, with the increases we've got this year, which are quite small overall compared to the total cost of the various licenses, various fees and charges, and the rate of inflation, I've got no issues, no problems, and I would support the recommendation as it stands.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments either? Councillor Putty.
Thank you, Chairman. With regards to immigration, how much workload it has added, and in which areas are they?
We're required to check the immigration status of all new applicants for operator and driver licences, and that involves taking information from documents that they're required to produce, and then we liaise with the immigration authority if we have any concerns that they may not have a right to be here, or there's a visa that's due to expire or whatever. We're also required to check on renewal, but only once. And then if those checks show that somebody perhaps has a visa for 6 months, we can only issue a licence for 6 months. So we're much more constrained in who we can give licences to and who we can't. And it's probably a good 45 minutes to an hour's work to do a thorough immigration check, particularly where somebody has a non-UK visa or has a visa that gives them a limited entitlement to be here. And there are all different types of visas. Some people can work, some people can't. There's entrepreneur visas, there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So we've had to learn all of that. And some people, even with a right to work, say students, can work 20 hours a week, but they can't work on a self-employed basis. So they can't work as taxi drivers during term time. And there's lots of sort of multiples of ways of looking at it. And so that's quite time consuming, but we do have to do these checks until we've checked every driver on renewal and every new applicant. So that's ongoing, the new applicants. Does that help?
Any other questions or comments on our fees and charges? It's a fairly straightforward inflationary rise. Okay, the recommendation is in 4 parts because, as you'll know, we have to put out for consultation the charges relating to taxis and private hire vehicles. So we'll just go through them. First of all, to approve the licensing fees and charges, except for Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles and private hire operators licences, which we can't implement straight away until it's gone out for consultation. So are we all agreed that that is approved and can be applied on the 10th of July? Agreed, thank you. Secondly, to agree the publication of the consultation notice for Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles and private hire operator licences as set out in Appendix 1 in accordance with the statutory process. So are we happy for that to go out for consultation? Agreed, thank you. Then it's just basically to recommend saying if there are no public objections within the consultation period or any objections are withdrawn, the fees relevant to the Hackney carriage and private hire vehicles and private hire operated licences will come into operation as set out in Appendix 1. Are we happy for that after the consultation? And also, are we happy for the licensing manager to decide on the date at which that comes into effect? Agreed? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Obviously, just to say, if there are relevant objections, then they will be considered by us at the next licensing meeting and we'll come to our decision then. Right, the next item then is the revised street trading policy, which I'm sure you all read with interest, and I hand over to Tom. Oh, I'll hand over to Linda.
Thank you. Just before I start, I just want to point out a couple of minor errors in the report. 5.8 of the report says that there's a right of appeal to Magistrates' Court. There isn't a right of appeal. There's an informal appeal to the head of service, but that's included within the policy. And there is an error we obviously copied over from another report, point 61, about the financial implications associated with taxis and private hire licensing. That should read street trading consent, so apologies for those errors. Moving on to the policy, members will be aware that the current street trading policy was last produced in 2007, so it's now 10 years old. So it's obviously time for review, because we don't think it's fit for purpose. We've had a range of application types over the years, from what was mostly kebab vans, burger vans, food stalls. We've had flower sellers, mobile coffee bars, that sort of thing. So we needed to review the policy to look at all types of applications. We've done quite a bit of work on that and produced this revised policy. But by way of a background, you'll all be aware that all of the streets in the borough are deemed to be consent streets, which means that anybody who wishes to trade has to have consent from the licensing authority. And that's by way of a street trading consent under Schedule 4 of the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act 1982. The legislation sadly doesn't have all the answers to modern day trading, much the same as it is for taxis. The legislation's a bit out of date and doesn't reflect current practices. So we've written the policy really to guide us and to guide applicants and guide yourselves through the decision-making process. We feel that there is a clear demand for mobile food services, mobile trades, trading from the streets, but we want it not to be detrimental to the health of residents or the amenity of their where they live, or to the public and other traders or road users. So we've included a nice policy aim at section 1, which I'm sure you'll have read. And we have, as we discussed earlier about the immigration, the Immigration Act 2016 didn't amend the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act with regard to street trading applications, but we feel that as an authority, we have a duty to ensure that we don't give licences to those people who they're not entitled to. So we have introduced the immigration checks for applicants for street trading consents, just to keep us in line with all other licence types and to ensure that we only give those consents to the right people. And we've given guidance to applicants in the policy to suggest that how they monitor their employees, because they have a duty not to employ people who don't have a right to work. So we're not doing that bit for them, we've just given them guidance in the policy. We've also decided to give greater clarity to applicants on the application process, because often they come in with a one-page application form, not really knowing much about a pitch, and that they haven't done their homework. So we're encouraging or directing applicants to be really considerate about what their business case is going to be. Is it a pitch that's going to be suitable for them to earn a living? Is it going to provide a much needed service? Is it going to cause problems for neighbours or other businesses? So we're really directing the applicants to think really hard about their application before they submit it to us. We've currently got a standard 200-metre consultation boundary for residents, but it's an arbitrary figure. We want to decide how far to consult on a case-by-case basis, because you might have somewhere in the middle of nowhere, you might have somewhere in the middle of an estate, and we don't want to have an arbitrary figure, because who's to say the person living at 201 metres may not be as directly affected as a person living at 199 metres. So we want to take out that 200 metres and say, well, look at this case, where do we need to consult to reflect the potential impacts of this application? We've got a standard list of consultees at the moment. Well, occasionally we've felt, well, perhaps we should speak to, say, the water authority or somebody if there's an application near a water course or something. So we want to have a bit more discretion about who we talk to, because on some occasions we felt the need to talk to other people, and we want to have that discretion within the policy. There'll still be some standard consultees, but we've added in a bit about consulting with other relevant parties on a case-by-case basis. You see from the policy we've given them guidance about towing vehicles, because not everybody has the class B2 or B3 on their driving licences anymore. We want to ensure that if you're towing your kebab van, your DVLA licence entitles you to do that. So it's guidance to applicants. We're not the enforcing authority, but it's to help them with their application to know that they're going to comply with all of the law, not just the street trading law. We think overall this policy will serve as an essential guide to applicants, existing consent holders and the licensing authority, where it will support all of our decision making. And as I said earlier, there is no legal right of appeal under the Act, but we do offer an informal appeal through natural justice, I suppose, to allow a second hearing of their application where it's been refused at officer level. They can go up to the head of service and say, I want you to revisit my application. And it gives them a second opportunity to have that reviewed, or the reasons for rejection reviewed. That really sums it up. If I've got any questions, let me know. Thank you.
Any questions? David?
Just wondering where on 4.2, where it says parish councils, whether you could put stroke town councils, as we have at least 2 town councils in the borough. Thank you.
Oh yes, I'll add that in. Sorry.
Councillor Putty?
Thank you, Chairman. On paragraph 5.8, can we get that clearly as to that the right of appeal go to the head of service, because this paragraph carries on saying about magistrate and Crown Court, but you're saying that there isn't any further appeal except go to the head of service. Is that what we mean? And also, when we talking here, giving grounds on which he, we should always put he and she.
We'll make that clear in the policy.
Thank you. Councillor Hussey?
Can I assume that after it's gone out to consultation for 3 months, that the paper will come back here with the comments that have been raised, any objections, whatever?
It will go out for 3 months consultation. The responses will be collated and considered, and the whole lot comes back here in the autumn. Yep, for final approval.
Thank you.
If that's the case,
Yes.
then I would move the recommendation, because depending on what comments come back, that might give us a lot of food for thought.
Thank you very much. So Councillor Hussey has moved it for approval. That's with the 2 amendments that Linda mentioned and the 2 that Councillor Leeks and Councillor Putty mentioned. Are we all agreed that that's ready now to go out for consultation? Yes, agreed. Thank you very much. And there's one extra item on the agenda. We had some compliance checks back on the 30th of June. They're always interesting to hear about, so I'm going to ask Roland if he'd just give us a rundown of those. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It was on the evening of Friday the 30th of June, in partnership with Hampshire Road Policing Unit and the DVSA Vehicle Inspectorates. Licensed officers conducted compliance checks on 54 licensed BDBC vehicles and drivers, and the results and actions arising of those compliance are shown below. So there were 54 drivers checked, and the breakdown is quite even between them, 28 private hire drivers and 26 hackney carriage drivers, and that was 30 private hire vehicles and 24 hackney carriage vehicles. The findings are shown below. There were 2 immediate prohibitions carried out by the DVSA and 1 suspension by an officer for the tyre. The main issues there, again, I think highlighted as being no fire extinguisher, no first aid kit and no fare meter card being carried. So as they're not serious, there still are breaches, and obviously they've all been given notices that to follow up that they must bring in those first aid kits, fire extinguishers, etc. The actions are shown at the end of the report, and whilst it may seem the re-inspections are high at 24, I say this is just literally covering all the findings, including, say, the fire extinguishers, first aid kits, etc. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that enforcement check? No? Thank you for it, though. It's nice to know that's going on. It gives us great comfort. Right, the only other item, I think, is the work programme, which is fairly self-explanatory. As has already been mentioned, the street trading policy will be coming back to us at the next committee. I suppose that the main thing that there will be at the next, hopefully the next committee meeting, our revised taxi and private hire policy, which will be a fairly major piece of work to look at, and then the ongoing fees and charges for the next financial year. I think that's probably it. I don't think we've got any other things. So I think I can formally close the meeting.